This is 21st Century Reformation at 21stcr.org.
I want to go back to Israel for a moment. Numbers 33. I'm just going to look at a couple of verses here in Numbers 33, but this is a part of Israel. You know, they left Egypt and crossed over the Red Sea and entered into their wilderness journey for 40 years. And Numbers 33 talks about their stages. It says, here are the stages in the journey of the Israelites when they came out of Egypt by divisions under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's command, Moses recorded the stages in their journey. So Moses actually kept a record of their journey and the stages, the various stages that they went through. And this is the journey by stages. All in all, and I did the calculations, I went through and read, all in all, I counted 42 different stages in their journey. Can you imagine that? 42 different stages. And you think about what was involved in those stages. I mean, there were millions of people and their animals and their children and all that they possessed and carried with them, and they brought through it. And they'd have to set up this entire tent. Can you imagine setting up a tent city, Ray, for millions of people and being under that responsibility to do that and make sure we set everything up and we provide for all the things that we need and get it all set up. It was a major.
Your family, if you need help.
What's that?
I can help with your family.
You get help with my family? Well, that's a major. I'll come. My family likes to go camping, and in our heyday, you know, when we had all 11 kids living at home, and we'd go to the beach and we'd bring our tents, and it would look like a little city there, tent city there. Bunch of refugees there at the beach. But I can't imagine Moses and the millions of people that he had to deal with. But 42 different stages in the journey. They didn't finish the journey overnight, did they? How long did the journey take for them to get from Egypt to the Promised Land? 40 years. 40 years. That's a long journey, isn't it? 40 years. They had different stages in the journey. Anthony helped me with the pronunciation, but I believe the word is Masa. For the stages, Masa. There were 42 different stages in the journey. Masa means literally to pull up stakes. To pull up stakes. So when you're camping, right, and you're getting ready to pack up, you pull up the stakes to your tent, you pack everything up, and you move on to the next phase of the journey. So 42 different times on their journey, they had to pull up the stakes, pack everything up, load up the animals, load up the women and children, head on out to wherever God was taking them. And did they always know where the next destination was going to be in that journey? And what was going to wait for them? And what were going to be the challenges to that journey? You know, sometimes they'd show up, where's the water? Where's the water? I mean, that's always the key things. What are we going to drink? I'm thirsty. Where's the water? What are we going to eat? Right? They didn't have McDonald's in the wilderness. What are we going to eat on this journey? And so forth. And sometimes they got a little cranky, didn't they, Nola? Like, I don't see a Walmart out here anywhere. There is no Bed Bath & Beyond anywhere. There's no place to get my nails done. I don't see anything that I'm familiar with out here. I want to go back. I don't want to be here anymore. Right? Let's go back to Egypt, Moses. I know we were slaves for 430 years, but at least we got to eat onions and cucumbers and, you know, all the things that they were familiar with. Some people they want to go back. They would choose the familiarity of slavery to the uncertainty of the freedom in the Lord. There was a journey. There were temptations to deal with. There were lessons to learn. There were mistakes to be made. They fell off the bicycle a few times, didn't they? Even Moses fell off the bicycle a couple of times, didn't he? Skinned his knee up pretty bad. God says, speak to the rock. And what did Moses say? Joe, must we get water for you from that rock? So sometimes even those in leadership struggle on the journey. We fall off our bike sometimes. There were messes to be made. There were rules to be learned. God had to say, okay, this is how I want you to live together as a community. Okay, you're not slaves anymore. You're living in the freedom of being the people of God. But here's the way that we live together in community as a community of love. Journey was not smooth. As we said, it was not a linear journey. There were many, many challenges, many twists and turns in the journey, in those masa, in those stages, and through the wilderness. Look in your books. We're skipping ahead to page 10, and if you're still following along inside the book, we're up on page 10 now. Looking at the journey of faith. But I want to apply some of this masa, some of this stage theory now, and look at it specifically to how it applies to our journey. And I like the fact that Joe admitted that he borrows from the work of others. I mean, that's part of the guide. We have our guides, don't we? Right? We have our guides. The teacher's job is to guide you. The pastor's job is to guide you. Well, we look to people also to help guide us in our journeys too, and help us to understand. And so, Robert Gulick, who's no longer living, and Janet Hagberg wrote a book called The Stages of Faith. They call it The Critical Journey. And they talk about these 6 stages, and I want to take a few minutes to apply this idea of stages in a way that hopefully will make sense to you, and that you'll be able to visualize and relate to, and then we'll interact with it. The journey was, as we said, was not smooth. It was not linear. It was cyclical. But 6 stages, and this is page 11 in your material. And hopefully we can get through at least this part of it today, because I think this is important. I think there's some things that will help you relate to. Critical journey is composed of 6 stages. The first 3 are primarily external, lived on the outside. The 4th one is more internal, and then the next 2 are kind of a mixture of both. But stage 1, let's look at the first one. The stage 1 of the critical journey is we believe. Say that with me. We believe. So if you want to fill in the little blank, that's what you're going to put in there. We believe there. It's the discovery, the initial discovery and recognition of God. Okay? We believe in God. Now, when does that happen in the journey? Well, that all depends on where you're from and your background. Oftentimes, this is very early in our biological journey. If you were in such a case where you were brought to church as a child, I think some of us probably had that experience. I had that experience. I think probably I was in church when I was probably less than a month old, I think. And can't remember a time in my entire life when I wasn't. So if that's a part of you, probably for many of us, believing in God was an important major first step, and it kind of was as natural as breathing oxygen. Anybody have that experience here? A few of you? Okay. Not everybody, but a few of you. It was just to discover, I believe in God. It doesn't always occur at that stage in life, though. Sometimes it occurs at a later stage. And I mentioned yesterday this young girl that 10 years old, next door neighbor of a lady in our church who said, who's God? So it's not applicable of everyone. Or we could even say, well, a person's understanding of who God is might change. Some people might have a different understanding of God. The conversion can be instantaneous, can happen right away, or it can be the result of a process over much time. We looked yesterday at the Ingalls scale, saw that it can be a process. Sometimes it can happen instantaneously. But that first stage is that initial stage of believing. I believe in God. I believe that there is a God, that there is a power and a source and a person that's greater than me. Stage 2 of the journey is we belong. It's a time of learning and belonging. It's called the life of discipleship, right? If anyone would come after me, he needs to be my disciple. What is a disciple?
Follower.
A disciple, a person who is under a discipline, a student. I like I like one of the ways that it's been expressed as an apprentice. Think about an apprentice. Dallas Willard talks about being apprentice to somebody. That's the model of you learn while you're doing. You're the student or the disciple comes alongside of a master, teacher, leader, and is not only taught, but is also gets an opportunity to do it. That's what Jesus did with the 12. He apprenticed them, right? He taught them, and then he said, okay, now this is how you do it. Now I want you to do it, and now we're going to learn from it. So it was the action and reflection model of learning. So a disciple, a student. But you're a part of that group. You're a part of that community. It's in the developmental stage. You're learning these ideas and putting them into practice. Stage 3 is the productive life. It involves consciously serving God through one's spiritual gifts. The truths learned at stage 2 find an outlet in service in stage 3. We give and we serve. It's the productive life. It's the person, they've learned, they've gone to Sunday school, they've learned the basic lessons in class, and now they're participating, they're involved, they're doing things. Now, as church leaders, we love these people, don't we? Right? Hello? Any church leaders out here? Willie, you're an elder. You like, when somebody steps up and says, yeah, I really want to teach a Sunday school class.
I want to really look at them.
But that idea that somebody's willing to serve, or somebody's willing to be involved, or somebody's willing to participate, or somebody wants to take an active participatory role in the life of the church. I really feel like God is calling me to participate. Man, we love that stuff. And in many cases, that is the ideal in our minds as far as the life of the church, right? Man, we can get some volunteers that are helping. And why does that mean so much to us oftentimes?
We know the good that they can do, and sometimes their gifts are different from ours, and so we know more is being done for God.
Right, complementary gifts, many hands make light work. I think my mom used to say that. Many hands make light work, right? So we like that. And also we think, well, maybe if they're doing a little bit more, maybe I can catch my breath a little bit too, right? So we like that notion of people giving and serving. And a lot of times we think, well, man, once a person's in a place where they're using their gifts and they're serving, man, they've arrived, and we think that's the destination. And a lot of times we feel like that's where we're trying to get people to go to. Is that where we're trying to get people to go to? Is that the final destination, Joe? Is that the final destination, getting workers in the church? Is that the is that the final destination? No. No. But a lot of times I think in our churches we kind of act like that really is. In terms of the discipleship process, the training process, the spiritual instruction process, is get these people actively involved in working, in service, in giving, and that's a kind of an institutional approach to it, isn't it? Right? Well, we want to feed the institute because we got to have people. Because if people aren't giving and if people aren't going to serve, what's going to happen to the church?
Close down.
It's going to close down, right? Right? Church is going to shut down. If we don't have people giving, we don't have people serving, we're not going to have a church anymore. It's eventually going to die off. And that is true. That is true. But is that the final part of that journey? So I'm going to kind of introduce something challenging. It's probably something that you know, but you hadn't really thought about. And I want to spend some time with this. Stage 4. And we're going to talk about the wall in a second. We'll go back to that, the wall. But stage 4 is what we call the journey inward. The journey inward. The journey inward is a deep and very personal inward journey that almost always comes as an unsettling experience, yet results in healing for those who continue through it. Let's think about this journey inward. At this stage, a person faces changes, or at least many people do, to almost the opposite mode. It's a time where many people begin to question to explore, to fall apart, to doubt, to dance around issues. It's a time for some of uncertainty. It's a time that sometimes people appear to be hopeless. Now let's think about that for just a minute. So you've grown up in church, you've always believed in God of some sort or some form, and you've learned and you've grown and you've gotten involved, and maybe you're even involved in leadership, and suddenly at some point you wake up and you realize, does that all make sense? Is that right? Is that right? Is this all there is? I'm doing all the things that I think I know to do and I'm supposed to do, but I have nagging questions or I have nagging doubts. Now this can be, in some ways, an encouraging thing. It can also be a terrifying thing. Now let's think about it. Let's think about our dealings with trying to help people come into a new realization of the truth. Let's think about a person that maybe has grown up in a typical evangelical church and has grown up believing certain things. Now, don't we want them to go through a period of doubt if we're talking to them about their faith? Don't we want to have them go through periods of doubt where they begin to wonder, well, is that right? Is God really? Is God really three? Who here came into the Church of God not from the traditional route of growing up in the church, but came in from a change from the outside? Okay. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but wasn't there that idea of doubting or wondering if all that I've traditionally been taught up until this time, is it really true? Is it really right?
You have to be shattered before you can be retaught. Sometimes it takes a very tough spanking. You're reduced to nothing. And you say, well, where did I get this wrong? Let's build this whole thing again fresh.
So it's a recognition that maybe what I've been believing or what I've been focusing on my life up to this point isn't all that there is, or isn't correct. Yeah, it's a crisis. And that's what we talk about when we talk about the wall. It's that walking into something and saying, that's the crisis, that's the critical part of the journey. For the first time, our faith does not seem to work, or we feel remote, distant, immobilized, unsuccessful, hurt, ashamed. Neither our faith nor God provides what we need, we think, to soothe us or heal us or answer our prayers. Have you ever met somebody in that situation? Grew up in the church, seemed to really maybe even be a very all-together Christian, have all just doing great, and then all of a sudden they hit some sort of a situation in their life where it just seemed to all fall apart? You seen that experience? Or maybe you've had that experience yourself. And I'm here to say that is a part of the journey of faith. That there are those times, there are those parts in the critical journey when we hit up against a wall, when we find ourselves shaken, when the answers that always came quite easily in the past suddenly aren't there anymore. As we talked about, it can be a theological question, it's foundational about the existence of God. What are some other kinds of issues that could cause a believer, in your experience or things that you've observed or seen, what are some other kinds of issues that can form this crisis, this hitting against the wall?
Does God hear me? Does God really care about little old me?
Okay. Does God hear me?
Definitely tragedies. I think a lot of times personal attacks, and that shakes people's faith and makes them wonder. And a lot of times people will become angry with God and turn from Him through disease or death or something that's happened from other individuals. They start doubting because they're thinking, I'm doing what I'm supposed to, and yet this is coming against me.
That's a shattering experience, isn't it? God, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I go to church. I'm active. I mean, I'm not out in the bars every night. I'm not out, living a wild life. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm a good boy. I'm a good girl. I'm a good Christian. I'm faithful. And you still let this stuff happen to me.
Well, you think of John the Baptist. It's listed here, but that is a classic example of he was doing what he was supposed to, speaking the truth from God, and yet he was in prison. And I think it's interesting, he had to get that reassurance from Jesus, are you the one?
That's
he
right.
Knew he was.
That's right.
But he wanted to hear, are you the one, or should I expect someone else? Because he had done what he was supposed to, and he was in prison.
That's a great example. 3 years earlier, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, right? You're greater than me. I'm not worthy to untie the thong of your sandal. You should be baptizing me, not me new. And what happened? Now he's saying, is this really the Messiah?
Because it didn't make sense.
Didn't make sense.
He was in prison.
Right. And he's not the only one. What about Judas? What about Peter? You know, when Jesus says, okay, the Son of Man is going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to be betrayed by the chief priests and he's going to be crucified, and on the third day he's going to rise again. And Peter says, that's not going to happen. Right? That's not a part of my script for you, Jesus. My script is you're going to go to Jerusalem and we're going to lead a revolution and we're going to defeat the Romans and we're going to kick them out and we're going to install you as the Davidic Messianic king now. We're going to use by force. And I'm ready to go with you, and I got my sword right here and I'm ready to, right? And then Jesus says, get behind me. Get behind me, Satan. And then later on he says, Peter, put your sword away. And then Peter goes, I don't even know who this is. I don't even know who this is. And in a sense, he didn't know who Jesus was. For 3 years, he'd had this idea in his mind of who he thought Jesus was, but he didn't really know who Jesus really was. He didn't really get what kind of a Messiah he was going to be, and I think that was true for all of them. Does that happen in people today?
That's a developmental thing. That about the time you get your faith down to rote, that you know what you believe, and if you're not challenged by God to trust Him in an area where you haven't been before, then you're not growing, and you're probably not connected with Him. Your faith is just a rote kind of thing, that you have memorized, and this is what you do, and this is you could have a perfectly good devotional life, and you think you're doing everything right because you're doing it like the scribes and the Pharisees did it,
Mm-hmm.
and not really connected up. And you'd hope and pray at that point in time that you would be challenged to have to struggle, to have to find something bigger than the God that you just had.
That's the big growth edge, isn't it?
That's the Bible prayer that rings in my ears. Craig Dodd's book, they didn't teach me this in church. Oh God, if I'm deceived, please send some kind person to undeceive me. We don't look at the content of our faith sometimes because the way everybody believes around us, this is it. That's a dangerous assumption. We need to give God a chance to change us radically, even, may I say, doctrinally in some areas. Because, as was being said earlier, the price of truth, is the most precious thing. You cannot compromise truth.
So it's a shattering experience. It can be an earth-shaking experience. And yet, as we've said, true growth is not going to happen. You're going to be stuck. You're going to be at a certain stage if you don't move beyond that. And God is interested in our growth. That's what James was talking about. You know what James said, and I've often puzzled over James 1 when he says, consider it, what is it, pure joy?
That's the kidding.
When you go through various trials. Really, James? Pure joy? Pure joy is going down to Krispy Kreme donuts and a cup of coffee and a couple of hot glazed donuts. That's pure joy, right? Pure joy is seeing my children being born and, grow up. That's pure joy. Pure joy is not having your heart broken. It's not having your assumptions challenged. It's not falling flat on your face. It's not having all the way that you perceive the world ought to be come completely crashing down. That is not pure joy in terms of our experience. And yet, in terms of our critical journey, see, we haven't arrived yet. This is the testing part, right? This is the disciples out there saying, we're here in the middle of the desert and there's nothing to eat and we're hungry. What are you going to do for us? Or we're thirsty and there's nothing to drink. How are you going to provide for us? And then that's when the opportunity then for God to reveal Himself and to teach us. But for many then at this part, it's like all the things that I've always thought and I've always believed don't seem to be working. So I have to go and I have to revisit this. And it's an invitation to re-examine the faith at a much deeper level, at a much more profound level. Some people choose to enter into it, and that invitation, it becomes a significant opportunity for growth and change and transformation. It's very critical. Some it becomes the cocoon, so to speak, that the caterpillar enters into, and then when they emerge, they're the butterfly, right? This is that significant stage. For others, they run up against this and say, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this anymore. And then there's a turning away, sometimes temporarily. It's not always permanent, but you've had that experience. You've seen people that came into the church and were just excited and on fire and doing great guns, and then all of a sudden, where are they? And oftentimes, if you talk to them at a superficial level, you might get an excuse from them, like, well, we're just really busy. We just got a lot of stuff going on, and we don't have time for this. But in some instances, if you stick with them and establish a relationship of trust with them, they might invite you in to see that they're dealing with this wall experience.
On the other side, like in this,
That's very true. A lot of times the focus can become so institutional focused, and it's about keeping the institution vital. And the institution needs to remain vital, but yet, you're right, sometimes you can get so focused on the structures or the forms of the institution that you miss out on the fact that I still need to be growing and maturing and developing my faith. Absolutely.
I think it's important to teach people too that, as Christian workers, we're trying to work with others and to let them know that this is a normal stage and a process, and for them to be open enough to share, I'm struggling with this, I planned this event, I planned whatever, and I did it, and now I'm getting criticism, and I'm feeling like I'm being knocked down and that, we can even look for the people in the scriptures, how many times they face this. It doesn't mean they're not doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
We need to encourage them at this point and let them know that this is going to happen. Sometimes we hear the prosperity, and they do too. If you do this, then you're going to be rewarded. But as we see from the scriptures, that's not always the case.
And so helping to come alongside of them and prepare them so that they don't think, well, what's wrong with me? Yeah, I'm going through this experience. There must be something wrong with me. I must be doing it wrong. No, if you're going through that experience, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing it right. And this is a part of the journey and a part of the process. And that is exactly why I think it's so important for us to understand this, but also to be working with our people in our churches and helping prepare them and work through that process. Because some people pull back out of sheer embarrassment, right? I didn't realize that I was going to have these kinds of trials and temptations and struggles, and I failed, and I fell off the bike, and I skinned my knee, and I'm hurting, and I'm ashamed, and so I'm just going to withdraw. And that's the time when they need us to come in to love them and help them and be a blessing to them. I remember, I think one of the first times I hit that wall was I spent almost 3 years in England trying to plant a church. And I went over there we're going to start a church in England. It's going to be great and powerful. And we're going to go into this dark continent where nobody believes and nobody goes to church. And we're just going to turn this whole thing upside down. And after about 3 years, I fell on my face. And I pulled every trick out of my sleeve that I knew to get where I thought we needed to be, and it wasn't happening, or at least it wasn't happening as quickly as I thought it ought to be happening. And I came back, and I was just devastated. I was exhausted, and spiritually I began to question myself. But as I look back now, 20 years later, I can say, that was a good thing, because it taught me to depend a whole lot more on God than I ever had. Because up to that point, I was a kind of an arrogant, I thought I knew all the answers. I had my diploma from Oregon Bible College, and I knew the truth, and boy, oh boy, watch out, world. And I discovered that there are challenges, so it's part of the process. And part of the process then is getting up after you've fallen off the bike and just continuing on the journey and doing it. And that's where that faith is developed and grown. And a lot of people don't get up off the bike again. And so that's the encouragement. Just moving on real quick, just so we can get through the next couple of things, not because I don't think this is very fruitful and I wish we had a lot more time to even have this conversation. Look at stage 5. Having gone through that, and the idea is you don't go over the wall, you don't go around the wall, you just got to keep on going through the wall, and with God's help and God's strength that you'll do it. Surrender to God and hopefully move on to much deeper levels of spiritual growth. Having gone through that, stage 5 is we begin the journey outward again. We once again focus our journey outward, but it's from a new, more grounded, more centered perspective of ourselves. We have a newfound confidence that God really is there. There's a greater appreciation for God's grace and God's mercy and God's power and God's sufficiency. And I really understood for the first time what Paul meant when he said, when I am weak, then I am strong, and learning to embrace our own weaknesses and our own fallenness. Really, it's not about me, it's about what God is able to do in spite of me or somehow through me. And it's that acceptance that God loves me just as I am. Just as I am. We sing that song all the time, don't we? Just as I am, without one plea. But we do understand that? Because I think a lot of people, and I know I experienced this, it's that idea, if God really knew me, He wouldn't like me very much. Do you ever have that feeling? You know? If God really knew all the junk and all the things, I know that if most people really knew me, and you know that, boy, if most people knew what I think about sometimes, they would not like me, they wouldn't want to be around me, right, Andy? Andy says, amen. I know you and I don't want to be around you. But it's that idea of to know oneself, to know that despite our flaws, despite our brokenness, despite how ruined our sin is. And I think sometimes we approach sin at a superficial level. You know, I know when I was baptized, yeah, I'm a sinner. But I don't think I really understood just how depraved I really was. We have no idea how depraved our hearts can really be. It's only through these processes, a part of that journey, that we begin to uncover just how we get rid of some of the obvious sins. But then we get into those really nasty sins that sometimes masquerade as righteousness. See, that's where the Pharisees had a hard time. Because their sins were very well masked under the cloak of righteousness. You see? And to be able to cut beyond that. And it's not pleasant, and it's not easy, and it's not fun. And if we try to point that out in the lives of others, I mean, how well did the Pharisees receive Jesus when He tried to point out those little things? Wayne, were they very glad? I'm so glad that you pointed out this hypocrisy in my life, Jesus. Did they like that? Were they appreciative of the process? No! They said, we got to shut this guy up. He's going to mess everything up. We got our own little ways of doing things, and we're quite happy with the system as it is, and he's going to come along and he's going to disrupt everything. Right? He's going to shake it all up. And that's the fact is, the Spirit of God is a disruptive influence to our status quo, and it reveals and it unearths the depths of our sin and our depravity. But the good news is that we discover is that in spite of all of this, God is still there for us. He hasn't given up on us. He hasn't abandoned us. He hasn't forsaken us. And we're able to then, taking that newfound sense of God's love and grace and mercy, even in the midst of our own humanness, to be able to then go out and have a greater appreciation for the lives of other people. This is the impetus to evangelism, I think. This is the thing that fuels that power to go out and look beyond ourselves and to care for others and to share the gospel.